Marta was sitting cross-legged on the damp sand, gazing at the enchanting sea horizon. She was sitting there without a beach chair or a large blanket. Marta was dressed in short, almost masculine, dirty yellow shorts and a simple black tank top. The cold sand stuck to exposed patches of her skin, and the salty, refreshing breeze blew directly into her face, tousling her hair. Marta came to this place whenever she felt her strength waning, whenever she needed a reset and some emotional solace. Today had been a tough day. From early morning until almost noon, she had been running to various interviews. Some places had immediately turned her away upon learning about Marta's unconventional past. Others had scrutinized her lack of experience, prodding at her like one might poke at a little mischievous kitten. Often, the kitten doesn't understand what it did wrong, no matter how vigorously it's poked. Marta felt the same way. How could she gain experience when no one would hire her without it? But no one dared to ask her that unspoken question, nor could they provide an answer. She had no older, supportive relatives either, which is why she was simply sitting there, trying to detach herself from all her problems, taking in deep breaths of the fresh sea air. She sat there, attempting to quell the feeling of awkwardness and even fear that had plagued her throughout the day. Marta was only 19 years old and had not yet been able to get any education. She just graduated from high school. Right after turning 18, Marta, like all her peers, had to move out of the children's home where she had grown up and become the person she was today. Fortunately, she had a place to go. The state had provided her with a tiny one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of her beloved hometown. She believed she was incredibly lucky. Many of her friends, who were also raised in care homes, hadn't been given housing yet. Marta wanted to enroll in a college or, even better, a university. However, she had no illusions about studying on a government scholarship, despite her eligibility for one. Besides, her apartment, precious as it was, came with utility bills that she had to pay on her own, even with subsidies. What's more, taking care of Max also cost her a pretty penny. Regardless of how you looked at it, the bottom line was that she needed to find a job that could make a living first and then consider studying through distance learning or evening classes. Max's story was a unique one. Marta found him on her birthday, and it felt like fate. This poor, clearly abandoned cat crossed her path not far from a grocery store. He was scruffy, emaciated, and constantly wary of passers-by, though he still held on to hope for human support. It was evident. In his melancholic amber eyes, one could see despair and pain. There was also an unspoken question: why? It was quite clear that, in better times, his feline life had been rather comfortable before some terrible tragedy struck. Now, a large, still healing scar marred his back, and his once fluffy fur was matted with unkempt tangles, with fear evident in his gaze. Marta simply couldn't walk past this unfortunate soul. She used her last bit of money to cover the costly vet bills and, unable to part with the cat, took him in. And so, the girl's future was determined. Now, she urgently needed to find a job, as she had to provide for not only herself, but also a living, defenseless creature that she had foolishly taken in, succumbing to a momentary burst of sympathy. Several months had passed since then, and Marta had managed to work a variety of odd and unusual jobs. But for some reason, she couldn't seem to hold on to any of them for long. She was simply fired from her job as a hotel cleaner without any explanation. She was moved from her position as a beauty salon receptionist because the boss's daughter needed the job. Even the role of a sales consultant didn't work out for Marta. She was swiftly dismissed from that position when they realized she was too shy and couldn't perform her duties properly, which included attending to the few visitors of an upscale boutique. Marta also briefly worked as a cashier at a gas station, but she had to leave that job on her own as the customers and colleagues were overly intrusive. The night shift was especially challenging. In summary, the young graduate from the orphanage was facing real challenges in her job search. Today might not have been any different from the previous days, but a miracle happened. Marta, half-heartedly, managed to secure a new job. As she was sitting on the deserted beach now, she still remembered how nervous she was during today's interview, how awkwardly her gaze wandered, and how she didn't know what to do with her clumsy hands. It all turned out this way. From early morning, Marta had been running all over town, feeling desperate, and was trudging to her final interview, not expecting luck to suddenly smile upon her. She was applying for the position of waitress in a small coastal cafe. She had no experience in this role. Upon seeing the stern gaze of the elderly owner of the establishment, she almost wanted to leave without starting the interview. However, the old man's hoarse, commanding voice brought her back to reality. Perhaps you could make an effort to open your pretty mouth and explain to me why I should hire you, considering you've never even held a tray in your life? What did you expect when you came here? The cafe owner asked sternly. He was a short, lean old man. His bright blue eyes were hidden behind thick, bushy eyebrows, and his thin, pale lips were almost invisible due to his luxurious mustache. I'm just looking for a job, sorry, Marta replied meekly and lowered her gaze. She had already reached the door of his office, her hand resting on the round handle, with only one thought in her head: God, just let me get out of here. Fascinating. The old man chuckled and folded his arms across his chest in a closed-off posture that didn't bode well for the interviewee. Can't such a young and beautiful girl find a more suitable job in this town? It was clearly stated in the vacancy, with at least 1 year of experience. Marta blushed. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't notice. I've just searched through all the websites and newspapers for job listings. I must have had a real foggy mind. This is my 6th interview today. Again, I'm sorry for bothering you. She reached for the door handle again, but he stopped her. Wait. There was a certain spark in the man's eyes, whether it was interest or irritation, she couldn't tell. Why do you need a job so urgently? Don't your parents help you? Still holding onto the door handle, the girl unconsciously gripped it even harder. I don't have parents, I grew up in an orphanage. She looked at him challengingly, as if to say, there, now that you know everything, you can finally send me away. The cafe owner frowned. I see. In that case, he got up from his desk. In that case, are you a quick learner, young lady? Can you get the hang of this job in a week? Eyes widened, and the girl lit up with happiness. Yes, of course, I'll do my best. The gruff old man unexpectedly smiled warmly. Well, that's good. My name is Nicanor Castro. Come tomorrow at 8 in the morning. I'll show you and explain everything. The other waitresses will help you get the hang of it too. I'll need your ID, medical records, and employment history. Do you have those? Yes. An absolutely ecstatic Marta nodded. Of course, I do. She gave the old man the brightest smile she was capable of, and his gaze suddenly changed. There was no trace of the grumpy old man who had been grumbling earlier. Now, a pleasant silver-haired man with smiling, slightly tired eyes sat in front of her. Well, Marta, he called her by name after checking her resume. Nice to meet you. See you tomorrow. And make sure not to be late. I don't like slackers and sleepyheads. Don't worry, I'm used to getting up very early, the girl assured him as she left the cafe with a heart full of joy. Left alone, Nicanor thoughtfully nodded to himself, as if he were pondering his own thoughts or memories. He picked up the phone receiver from the vintage rotary phone on his impeccably tidy desk, dialed a number, and spoke to his unseen interlocutor. Orphanage number 27? I wanted to talk to someone from the administration. About one of your graduates. Yes, okay, I'll wait. Of course. And Marta, having spent about 40 minutes on the promenade, returned home after walking 4 kilometers on foot to save money. She burst into her apartment triumphantly, exclaiming, Max! Mommy is home. The fluffy, well-fed cat, lazily stretching, gracefully exited the single room. His black and gray fur glistened, and his yellow eyes were still half closed. It was evident that the lazy creature had spent the entire day waiting for his owner. He glanced at his mommy, meowed as a greeting, and rubbed on her legs. Hello, dear. She ruffled the cat's head. And you can't even tell that you used to be skinny and bald. Look at you now, all robust and healthy." She laughed as she picked up the cat. He didn't resist and melted in her arms, purring gratefully. "I got a job," she said triumphantly to him. "Yes. I was hired." She turned the cat to face her, holding him by his front paws. Max wiggled out of her grasp and hurried towards his food bowl. He meowed loudly, seemingly complaining that he hadn't been eaten for at least a week. "Yes, my sweetheart. I need the job to feed you." She followed the cat to the kitchen and opened the refrigerator. She took out a packet of cat food for her pet and a small red and green apple for herself. One might think she was dieting and limiting herself to such a small dinner. Unfortunately, she simply didn't have money for more substantial meals, as it all went to feed the voracious little creature. Marta didn't mind at all, thinking, "Who cares? It's worth it." After devouring the apple to the core, leaving only a few seeds behind, Marta prepared for the next day. She took a quick shower, tied her short hair into simple hairbands, and sorted through her modest wardrobe, determined to look her best. She wanted to shine. Late in the evening, while lying in bed, Marta tossed and turned relentlessly. She couldn't seem to fall asleep, and her mind was filled with various, mostly frightening thoughts. What's the team like? What if I can't do it? What if I get cheated? What if? The questions that were racing through her mind didn't let her rest. First day on the job, it's the most important, she thought. In the end, she only fell asleep in the early hours of the morning. But, contrary to Marta's concerns, her first day at work went smoothly. Although she wasn't allowed to interact with customers yet, she was fully assisted in understanding the workplace. Nicanor, on closer inspection, turned out to be a real taskmaster. He was constantly mumbling something to himself, frowning, and noting even the tiniest shortcomings in his subordinates' work. And just when Marta thought that she might not keep this job, the cafe owner praised her. He said she did an excellent job, and she would soon be able to start her real work with official employment. Marta was overjoyed, as Nicanor promised a decent salary and hinted at potential tips that she could manage at her discretion. She hadn't held that much money in her hands in a month at her previous jobs. But not everything was as good as it might seem at first glance. The team Marta was destined to work with turned out to not be entirely pleasant. Of course, some of these people were perfectly nice and kind, but others, to put it mildly, they had quite unique personalities. For example, Dora Arias is the cafe manager. She was a short, stocky, and middle-aged woman. Her face was pleasant and well-kept, and her manners were polite. But all of this was just on the surface. If you got to know her better. "Hey, you, the newcomer." Dora grabbed Marta's hand, causing her to nearly drop the trembling tray she was holding. "Are you deaf?" "No," Marta replied softly. "What's wrong? How dare you ask me this? Look at yourself, doesn't anything bother you?" Puzzled, Marta looked at her hands and her clothes and then glanced around the half-empty room. Most of the tables were vacant, and the bored waitresses were either flirting with the bartender on duty or scattered around the corners of the back room, surfing their smartphones. "Please, just tell me straight," Marta finally pleaded. "What am I supposed to notice?" Dora rolled her eyes. Due to her short stature, she was looking up at her charge, and if you couldn't hear their conversation, it might appear as though it was Marta reprimanding her boss as a subordinate. This idea even crossed the mind of Gloria, one of the waitresses who was idly nearby. She shook her head, dispelling this illusion. What an imagination, she marveled silently. To think of such things. Look at yourself. Dora, however, persisted. And then look at other girls, they all look like models. It's important for our business. The customers should enjoy looking at those who serve them. And you? What's this? She casually grabbed the poor girl by the edge of her long t-shirt with a bright print. Where did you find this rag? In the trash, huh? How could you dress like this, I'm asking you? Marta lowered her gaze again and examined her clothes once more. She was wearing thin black leggings and her favorite t-shirt with the cute cat face. She nervously swallowed. Nickiner said I would have a uniform. They haven't given it to me yet, so I dressed as best as I could. Dora seemed to be boiling with anger. You dressed terribly. Absolutely no taste at all. And one more thing, take a look at your appearance. She waved her small, plump hand right in front of Marta's face. Besides, you need to grow your hair, or you will look like a boy. And you should learn how to do proper makeup and, ideally, get a nose job. EW. What did our Nickiner see in you? Oh, right, how could I forget, you're the poor little orphan. Dora said it in a high-pitched theatrical voice. It's disgusting even to look at you. The manager, deliberately bumping into Marta with her heavy shoulder, headed off into the back room. As for the newly appointed waitress, she put the tray on a table after swallowing the lump in her throat and rushed to the restroom. There, she washed her face with cold water and dared to look at herself in the mirror. In the reflection, she saw a young and quite attractive girl. Her short, honey-colored, curly hair was pulled back into a small ponytail on top of her head. Since her hair was short, she could only put a small part of it back. The rest playfully swirled around, free from colorful restraining bands. Her large, greenish eyes were hidden behind a thick set of naturally dark lashes. Her full lips quivered, giving away Marta's last efforts to hold back tears. She turned to the side and glanced at her nose. It was indeed a bit above average in size. It was a beautiful, prominent nose with a slight hump. Marta's favorite carer had always told her that it was a true Greek nose. Her classmates used to joke that maybe she had Georgian or Italian roots. But all these insinuations quickly ceased in middle school, when little awkward Marta gradually turned into a fragile teenage girl. Her unconventional beauty silenced malicious tongues and made their owners strive for her affection and love. In general, Marta had never had complexes about her appearance. However, after all the harsh words Dora said today, she wasn't sure if she was really beautiful or at least just cute. And this t-shirt? Oh my God, what was she thinking? Marta shook her head, trying to banish the horrible thoughts, and decisively left the restroom. In the narrow corridor, she immediately bumped into another waitress. Marta, I'm sorry. Thank goodness, this was just an ordinary, simple girl with no particular demands. She looked slightly older than Marta, and there was nothing about her appearance to catch the eye. She was just an average, nice girl. It's okay. By the way, I'm sorry. Could you remind me of your name? Marta tried to smile, blinking her reddened eyes. Lorenza. The girl greeted Marta with a friendly smile. Don't take Dora too seriously. She's not that bad. The most important thing is not to be afraid of her. She can be a bit difficult sometimes. She has a complex due to her poor growth, and she's been through a lot. You get it, right? Yes, Marta nodded. Thank you, I understand everything. That's right. Lorenza perked up. Hey, maybe after work we could go for a walk? I'll invite Gloria, too. She's also a waitress, the one with a darker complexion. Remember her? If you get the job, we'll be working the same shift, the three of us. She tilted her head to the side and squinted her eyes. Of course, I'm in. Marta looked at her new friend with gratitude. Listen, can you show me everything here? Explain how it all works. Nickiner seems to be in a bad mood today. Lorenza laughed. Nickiner is never in a good mood. Of course, let's go. She took Marta by the arm and dragged her into the large kitchen. There, Marta was introduced to the cooks, various technical staff, and finally, one of the bartenders who had come in for a meal after the shift. Each employee was entitled to a hot lunch here. If someone like Alejandro tried to maintain a close friendship with the kitchen staff, they wouldn't have to worry about their own meals. Marta noted with relief that, aside from this incident, not everyone was thrilled about her joining the team, but there were no more people like the awful Dora. She sighed with relief. It was better for her not to be noticed at all than to be noticed and reprimanded. Otherwise, her day was quite productive. At the end of their work shift, the three young girls walked along one of the city's waterfronts. Gloria and Lorenza stopped at a small ice cream stand and each bought an ice cream cone. Marta, on the other hand, claimed she didn't like sweets and didn't buy a dessert. In reality, she simply didn't have the money for it. She was ashamed to admit she was practically starving. They all sat on a bench that offered a beautiful view of the water and started chatting. "So, tell us about yourself. Where are you from? What are your interests? Why did you decide to work with us?" Lorenza greedily licked her ice cream while glancing at her new colleague. "I don't even know what to say. I'm just an ordinary girl," Marta answered reluctantly. "I'm a local. I was born and raised here. Why did I take this job? I just got it," she smiled faintly. "I've always wanted to be a marketer. Advertising and the service industry have always interested me. I wanted to learn how this business works from the inside." Gloria, who was sitting on the edge of the bench, lazily said, "Why didn't you go to university or college, then? Why did you start working right away?" Gloria was older than the other girls, a tall and slender brunette with dark eyes who regarded the world skeptically and her friends condescendingly. Marta involuntarily shrank, feeling embarrassed, and turned away from her new acquaintances. "There's always an opportunity," Gloria mumbled, taking a pack of cigarettes and a lighter from her coat pocket. She lit one, squinted her eyes, and sighed. "You need the desire and brains. If you're clever, you can even get a scholarship." "Yes, but I have to pay the bills, and, on top of that, I have a gluttonous cat." "So, it's not that simple," Marta replied with sadness in her voice. Then Lorenza, who had nearly finished her ice cream, joined the conversation again. "Well, our boss must have a good heart after all." "Don't be offended, Marta, but you're not doing great. I mean, at work. Nicanor can be strict with others." Lorenza chuckled. "Please, don't be upset." "It's really strange," commented Gloria, giving Marta a sideways look that sent shivers down her spine. "Why did he hire you right away? I remember when I applied. It is quite a favor that he took you in. Nicanor is a real perfectionist. He insists on experience and skills. He even treats the janitors as if they should be preparing an operating room, not cleaning floors. So, what made him like you? Will you share the secret?" She turned to Marta and may have deliberately, or perhaps accidentally, blown cigarette smoke right into her face. Non-smoker Marta immediately coughed, waved her hand to shoo away the unpleasantness, and blinked. She coughed, "I don't know," she shrugged after clearing her throat. "Maybe he saw potential in me?" "Don't make me laugh." Gloria gave Marta an angry look. "You live with your parents, right? Why are you paying for the utilities?" Marta responded, trying to sound more confident. "No, I live alone. I don't have parents. I have no one, I'm on my own." "Oh," Gloria drawled. "Well, it all makes sense now. Are you a poor orphan?" Marta was stunned. She had never been reproached for her lack of family as frequently as she had been today. It was as if she were somehow at fault for her orphanhood, as if her lack of parents were some sort of advantage. "So what?" she asked defiantly. "Does that make me any worse than others?" Lorenza responded quickly. "Nothing, of course. What nonsense is this? You misunderstood Gloria, right?" "Gloria?" She cast a disapproving look at her friend. "Yes, calm down, both of you," Gloria drawled lazily. "I didn't mean anything bad. I was merely explaining why Nicanor has taken such a keen interest in you, dear. He's from your background, too." "What do you mean by your background?" Marta squinted her eyes and asked. She was genuinely irritated and ready to fight to defend her good name. Of course, she immediately understood where Gloria was heading, but she wanted to see her friend explain her words. He grew up in an orphanage. Gloria shrugged her shoulders without hesitation. That's why he hired you right away. You told him you were an orphan, didn't you? Really? Marta was astonished. Lorenza, too, appeared taken aback. How did you know that? I just know. Gloria chuckled with satisfaction. You need to pay more attention. She tossed her cigarette butt into a trash bin, stood up, and stretched her legs. Well, let's go. It's time for me to go home. That day, Marta was surprised to learn that her boss had grown up in an orphanage. She had always believed that children without parents hardly stood a chance of succeeding in life. It seemed that people like herself were incapable of achieving anything greater than an average life. One of her carers once said something that stayed with Marta for many years. He said, "If you don't turn to crime or end up in prison, you can consider your life a success. Remember, you'll find it much harder to succumb to temptations than everyone else." Back then, Marta was frightened to think that her life was probably already predetermined. She stopped dreaming. She lost her youthful hope for a bright future. Her only goal was not to fail. She didn't dare hope for a better life. She didn't hope until the moment she personally met Nicanor. After all, he was quite successful. Marta didn't know how he lived, whether he had a family, children, or what he did besides his main work. However, she was sure that this was what success looked like. Yes, Nicanor could be quite rude and cynical in his remarks. But he had his own cafe. He, an orphan, had managed to become the owner of a thriving business and the leader of a fairly large team. Upon hearing this information, Marta developed a profound respect for her boss. From then on, no matter how critical he was, she couldn't let it diminish the deep admiration she felt for him. He became her role model, a living proof that even a child from an orphanage could achieve something worthwhile. Thanks to him, thanks to the mere fact of his existence, Marta had a purpose in life once more. She had a dream again. And someday I'll have my own business. Yes, it will definitely happen, Marta thought to herself, lying in bed before sleep, cuddling up with her beloved cat. Her days of work passed one after another. Marta, passionate about her new and, as she believed, promising job, hardly noticed how the days flew by and the seasons changed. She eagerly absorbed all the information about the restaurant business while observing how her boss operated. Even though Marta was just a simple waitress, she tried to delve into all the intricacies of the business. She closely watched the chefs at work and subtly observed the difficult-to-please restaurant manager. She marveled at the skill of the bartenders. She wanted to understand how to run her own establishment effectively, to grasp and learn this craft. Her salary was more than decent, and now she had enough to support herself and her beloved cat. Although she never indulged herself. Accustomed to making do with less, she didn't buy expensive clothes, spent little on food, and didn't rush to buy a new phone. Max, however, consistently received the very best and regular veterinary checkups. Gradually, her life was getting better, and she even started saving money, hoping to enroll in the part-time program at a specialized university in the near future. Someday, she dreamed, she would be able to open her own establishment, whether a cozy little cafe or even a restaurant. Even though Marta was sometimes afraid of Nicanor, she learned a lot from him. In reality, he wasn't as strict as he first appeared. Yes, he could be stern with the staff, critical, and noticed every little mistake. But on rare occasions, when Marta happened to be alone with him for some reason, Nicanor would soften and calm down. He eagerly shared his knowledge with her, seeing her as eager to learn and get better. He noticed how she stood out from the other waitresses. In Marta, he saw genuine interest in the business. While her colleagues hurried home after their shifts, Marta was always willing to stay a little longer and help others if needed. She worked tirelessly, trying her best to improve everything around her. After several months, Nicanor himself began seeking advice from the young waitress on certain matters. For example, it was Marta who suggested adding a seasonal drink to the menu, available for free after the 5th visit to the cafe. She took the initiative to handle the restaurant's online promotion. She created a social media page for the cafe. Not to mention that every day, passing by a small field, Marta would bring a bouquet of fresh flowers to work, beautifully arranging them and decorating the central window. Seeing that customers were drawn to the unusual interior, she convinced the owner to buy various knickknacks from the local flea market. She personally arranged and hung them throughout the dining area. Later, they sewed new curtains, and there was no end to the various innovations carried on by Marta, all executed with finesse. At the beginning, Nicanor would grumble, but he did it to just show off. So, what else has come into this girl's fluffy head? We've already spent a fortune on restoring what she calls vintage chairs. Nicanor grumbled. But gradually, the number of customers increased significantly, and Nicanor often found himself deeply satisfied. Who would have thought that this quiet and modest girl would turn out to be so creative? The old man would occasionally praise himself for such a valuable acquisition, smiling into his bushy mustache and looking contentedly at the agile waitress. One day, during one of the routine working days, another customary confrontation took place between Marta and the restaurant manager. Furious about something, Dora quickly made her way towards Marta. Her eyes blazed with anger, and her hands clenched into fists. "Hey, you! Come here!" Dora hissed angrily. "What is it?" Marta thought to herself, having become accustomed to Dora's behavior. None of the offensive words that flowed from the manager bothered her anymore. It was also quite evident that Dora disliked Marta more than the others. Why? She couldn't answer this question clearly. Perhaps it was an unconscious aversion, or perhaps something else. Marta had no desire to delve into the reasons behind Dora's constant displeasure. "Well, what's happened?" Marta lowered her voice, fearing that some of the customers might accidentally overhear them. "The customers are complaining about you. I'll fire you, damn it!" The manager yelled, ignoring the surprised patrons. "What?" Marta exclaimed in surprise. "Did someone complain about her? It can't be. Who, when?" "I don't believe you," she said firmly. "By the way, you don't have the authority to fire me, only Nicanor can do it." "We'll see about that," Dora hissed more quietly. "The 3 men you served last night are the ones who complained about you. I'll tell the boss everything, so you better believe it. If I don't fire you, he will, don't worry." Marta pondered who these men might be. She mentally went through all the guests she had served the previous night and couldn't understand who was being referred to. It seemed like everyone was satisfied, she thought, which was, for the most part, correct. The satisfaction of customers could be determined by one simple criterion: how much tip they left. Marta received much more in tips than the others, irritating and sometimes even infuriating her colleagues. But what could she do? She probably seemed slightly more friendly and slightly less arrogant. Trying to recall who Dora might be talking about, Marta suddenly realized. "Oh, it's those drunk idiots." Last night, just before closing time, 3 rather suspicious-looking men barged into the cafe. Marta immediately realized that they were already quite intoxicated. It was evident not only from their boisterous behavior, but also from the corresponding aroma that emanated from their lively group. Nonetheless, Marta put on a friendly smile and approached their table. "Good evening. Are you ready to place your order?" The most intoxicated and, evidently, the eldest among them leaned forward. "Bring us some drinks, sweetheart. Quickly." Marta closed her eyes briefly, trying to regain her composure. "What specifically would you like to order?" She reached for the menu lying on the table to open the page listing the available alcoholic beverages. "Please choose something specific, and I'll bring it to you right away." "Sure, here." The man randomly pointed to a spot on the menu. "And hurry up if you want a tip." Marta beamed a bright smile and was about to head to the bar when she unexpectedly received a rather stinging slap from one of the customers just below her back. He then shouted after her, "Hurry up!" He bellowed, laughing loudly in a rather horsey manner. Stunned by such audacity, Marta remained silent and quickly retreated to a safe distance from the table. Fuming with anger, she approached Salvador, the bartender, and said, "What jerks? I can't stand people like that." The young man, still focused on mixing cocktails, replied nonchalantly, "Yeah, it happens sometimes." Marta continued to express her frustration. "And we don't even have any male waiters. What should I do? I don't want to serve them." Salvador stretched his hand to pass the orders and responded, "Oh, come on, dear. I'm not in that business. You'll have to deal with it yourself." Marta frowned and sighed deeply. She collected the order for the unpleasant men and, trying not to reveal her annoyance, headed back to their table. In the following hour, the slightly inebriated customers continued to drink excessively. It seemed there would be no end to it. They were rowdy and behaved outrageously. Marta even found herself regretting her suggestion that the cafe should have been opened until the last customer left, as it had been her idea. But everything comes to an end eventually. When the inebriated patrons asked for the bill, Marta was overjoyed. Finally, "You can all leave," she thought to herself with relief. As they were leaving, one of the drunken men beckoned the waitress again. "Sweetie, why don't you come with us? Let's have some fun. Just don't be difficult. I hate it when people are difficult." He grinned menacingly and approached Marta almost too closely. She was instantly overwhelmed by the nuclear scent of alcohol wafting from his slightly open mouth and instinctively stepped back. "No, thanks, I need to go home." "Don't piss me off, bitch." He roughly grabbed Marta's hand. "Let's go," I said. Marta helplessly scanned the room, but there was no one to come to her aid. Salvador was calmly polishing glasses, wearing an indifferent expression. The other waitresses had already left. Should she have yelled for help or called someone? Maybe Basilio, the kitchen worker, would have some sympathy and stand up for her? But he was gone as well. Marta had no other choice. She reluctantly uttered the first thing that came to her mind. "Oh, yes, of course, just give me a moment. I need to finish my shift." She did her best to keep a smile on her face, despite the nauseating feelings that washed over her, and managed to free herself from his grasp. "Sure, just a moment." Once she had some space, Marta took a couple of steps back and quickly retreated to the storage room. The man yelled after her as he left, "We'll be waiting for you outside. Don't be late." Feeling repulsed, she laughed inwardly. He left the cafe with his friends, and Marta could finally relax. She huddled in the far corner of the storage room, leaving Salvador to close up the place and handle all the usual closing duties. Only an hour later, after ensuring the coast was clear through the outdoor surveillance camera, did she emerge from her hiding spot and hurry home. "Hey, are you here?" Dora waved her hand in front of the distracted waitress's face. "What are you thinking about? Feeling ashamed, are you? I'll say it again, complaints are being made about you, and you're on the verge of being fired more than ever." Marta, snapping out of her long contemplation, politely replied, "You're talking about those drunks? What did they not like?" "They left perfectly satisfied." "Oh, really?" "Well, today they returned disappointed." Dora's voice sounded malicious and aggressive. "Today?" the waitress asked in surprise. "Why is that? This is the first time I've heard of people coming with complaints only on the same day." "Yes, it happened today." Dora mimicked her subordinate with the most unpleasant tone. "They came to file a complaint. They said our waitress deceived them. What do you have to say about that?" Marta lifted her gaze and stared intently into the manager's eyes. For the first time in her employment, she was ready to stand up to Dora. "Listen to me now. I served those people properly. Much better than they deserved. I fulfilled all my duties at the highest level. Do you seriously think you have the right to demand that I go with them? Who knows where? It's absurd. The only deception on my part was returning from their unwelcome advances of a certain nature. Do you really believe that's a reason to fire me?" Marta's eyes were like thunderbolts. Dora hissed angrily, Then why did you agree? Why did you promise? That's irresponsible. Marta began to ponder. I just needed a way to protect myself. He grabbed my hand. I didn't know what else to say or who to turn to for help. By the way, where were you at the time? She asked. Dora was embarrassed and averted her gaze. Just then, Nicanor appeared behind them. He silently approached the arguing employees, and, by sheer coincidence, only Marta noticed his presence. Dora continued to berate her aggressively. You should be fully dedicated to your job. Where I was doesn't concern you. I come and go whenever I want. Got it? At these words, the boss, standing behind her, pursed his lips and furrowed his brow disapprovingly. Seeing his reaction, Marta smiled contentedly. However, the infuriated manager was oblivious to this change in dynamics and continued. Well, I would have gone with them for the sake of work if that's what's needed. Was it so hard for you to spend an evening in the company of men? Now I have to deal with unhappy customers. I'll fire you today. Dora, your reaction to Marta's entirely appropriate behavior is quite unpleasant. The boss's stern voice, which sounded behind her, had the effect of a bombshell. Dora, not expecting such a turn of events, nearly jumped and swiftly turned around. Nicanor, slowly and deliberately, continued speaking to her. For our line of work, it's essential that the cafe manager is always at their workplace. Moreover, trying to handle intoxicated customers, especially in the shameful manner you suggested Marta do, is not really in line with our profile. Frankly, these customers shouldn't have been let into the establishment in the first place. It was your responsibility to select security personnel at least a week ago, as we agreed in our last meeting, didn't we? But I see that Marta managed just fine without your intervention. I find myself thinking more and more, here. The boss intentionally paused for a moment. Dora hunched her shoulders and was standing without any movements, waiting for what would come next. I think you would be a much better manager, the boss concluded, looking at Marta significantly. Stunned, Dora opened her mouth and stared in amazement, unable to respond to such a tirade. But a few seconds later, she erupted. Of course, you always defend her. She's just a poor little orphan. She brought her fingers to the corners of her eyes, simulating a child's cry. Keep pampering that little chick. As for me, I'm leaving this decaying pit right away. With that, she threw away the folder with the new menu she was holding and stormed out. Nicanor Castro frowned in his usual manner and then turned to Marta, who was in shock, smiling to herself, satisfied. It seems events are unfolding much faster than I anticipated, he mused. Well, as they say, everything happens for the best. The boss left Marta in complete astonishment, wondering what would happen next. He might have seemed cynical, picky, or overly pedantic, but he was never cruel or unfair to his employees. His grimness and detachment had grown from a terrible incident that happened in the distant past. On a not-so-lovely day, the young and promising businessman lost his entire family in a car accident. Plans for a quiet weekend with his wife and 2 children at their country house crashed down when one of his business partners called with sudden changes to their schedule. He had to decline the family trip and assured his wife that he would take the train the following day. They should have enjoyed the sunny spring day by the bay without him. So, the family left without him. Around noon, he received a call from the emergency services reporting a horrible accident on the bridge. No one from his family had survived. His wife and 8-year-old son perished on the spot, and his 16-year-old daughter succumbed to her injuries the next day in the hospital. In a single moment, he lost all his loved ones. From that day forward, his life was plagued by misfortunes. His once thriving business withered without his attention, and a fast food giant overtook his chain of successful restaurants. He ended up as a lonely, childless, and disillusioned old man. He no longer held any hope of ever being happy again. His only possessions were a small, unremarkable cafe he had opened initially, a 3-room apartment in the city center, and an abandoned country house by the bay. He no longer expected to find happiness, but was content to see out the remainder of his life. Single, childless, and disillusioned, he felt like an old man. However, that was until last summer, when this young, shy girl came to apply for a job. She reminded him so much of his late daughter. Nicanor powered up his computer, accessed the surveillance screens, zoomed in on the image of the central hall, and looked intently at her once more. This girl, so fragile and yet so strong. She had also experienced her share of suffering in this life, much like him, who had lost his parents as a very young child. His father had perished in the early days of the war, and his mother had died from cholera during the evacuation. Now he felt like their destinies, his and the destiny of this young girl, were somehow connected. Why had she touched him so deeply? Maybe it was just the quirks of an old man. But at times, he felt as if this orphan girl held the soul of his deceased daughter. That smile. His daughter used to smile just like that. Lord, it seemed like he was losing his mind. He gazed once again at the image on the screen. Marta was taking orders from the next set of customers, chatting cheerfully with them. With Marta, it was always the same. She seemed to bring out the best in people. It seemed like he had finally made an important decision for himself. Nicanor turned off his computer, stood up, and headed downstairs with a determined stride. Today, Marta finally had a day off. She had decided to spend it as she had planned for a long time, lounging in bed all day, snuggling with her fluffy cat Max. She was lazily reclining amidst a pile of colorful pillows, occasionally drifting into a pleasant surface-level nap. Her blissful relaxation was suddenly disrupted by a phone call. It was her boss calling. What could have happened, she thought. She quickly answered. Hello? Marta? Good afternoon. I hope I'm not disturbing you. Nicanor's calm, slightly hoarse voice always had a soothing effect on her. No, not at all, she replied, sitting upright. Is something wrong? No. Well, yes. Can you come to work right now? I'll compensate you for the lost day off next week. Oh, sure, of course, Marta replied. I'll be there soon, Nicanor. She started to get ready, not even finishing the call. Within 40 minutes, Marta rushed to the cafe. Is he planning to fire me? She wondered, feeling apprehensive. But there's no reason to do so. He even promised to compensate for my day off. She walked inside, nodding to her colleagues. Passing by Lorenza, she stopped the waitress as she approached the boss's office. Why are you here? Lorenza asked in surprise. Today was supposed to be your day off. I don't know myself, Lorenza. Nicanor called and said it was urgent. I don't know what to think. But why do you look so worried? Did something happen here? Marta asked, sounding concerned. So you don't know yet? Lorenza raised her eyebrows. Dora got fired, can you believe it? We're all shocked, she lowered her voice conspiratorially. The girls are whispering that some terrible changes are coming. It seems like our old man has lost his mind and wants to fire everyone. It's like he's shutting down his business or something like that, I'm not entirely sure. But something's definitely happening, she nervously chuckled. We're probably the last to know. I'm afraid he called you in to let you go. By law, they're supposed to give a 2-week notice. What a shame. We had just become friends, she said in a rapid flow of words. Well, all right, let's go. Good luck to you. I'd better run. And she darted off downstairs like a startled bird. Marta panicked, her knees shook, and her mouth instantly dried up. Unable to regain even a semblance of composure, she timidly knocked and entered the boss's office. Nicanor, hello again. Hello, Marta, he said, his tone overly sweet. Surely, he's about to say he regrets it, but has to fire me, Marta thought, anxiety creeping into her mind. She tried to keep herself composed, but all her emotions were immediately evident in her expressive face. You look a bit off today. I probably pulled you in for nothing, didn't I? Nicanor said apologetically, making her even more distraught. Here's what I wanted to say, he sighed. Marta, do you enjoy working here? Marta felt like the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. She turned even paler and, visibly nervous, replied, "Yes, very much so. This is my best job. I'm interested in the food industry, and I'm just happy to work here." The cafe owner smiled and said, "That's good to hear. But you probably wouldn't want to work as a waitress for your whole life, right? There are other opportunities in life." Marta didn't know how to respond. She was ready to fall to her knees, burst into tears, and do anything to avoid being fired. No. I don't want to leave. Please, I'll work as long as needed. Please don't fire me," she exclaimed angrily and started crying. The old man got surprised. "Marta, what's wrong with you? I never even intended to. Why did you think that?" He got up from his chair. "Okay, never mind. Don't cry." He awkwardly patted her on the shoulder. "In short, Dora doesn't work here anymore, so I'm considering offering you the position. How do you feel about that?" Marta, with teary eyes, couldn't believe what was happening. She, an ordinary waitress, was about to become the manager. "Me? Thank you. Of course, I agree. I mean, I'm so thrilled." She wanted to throw herself into the old man's arms, but she quickly restrained herself. That would be a breach of decorum. "Excellent." The boss clapped his hands loudly. "I know that you're already aware of your future responsibilities. I've seen how closely you've observed Dora, how you've read magazines, and how you've tried to take care of many things for her when she was absent. And all the other things you've done for my establishment. I'm very grateful to you. Well, I can't speak eloquently, but you got it, right? Let's go," he said, firmly taking her hand. The whole team, forewarned by their boss, had already gathered in the cafe's kitchen. For such news that he was about to share with his staff, Nickiner even ordered the cafe to be closed for an hour, an unprecedented move. "Attention, please," the boss raised his hand. "I want to introduce our new manager." He paused dramatically. "I'm sure all of you already know this person." He surveyed all of his employees with a careful look, including Marta, who was standing modestly with her colleagues. "Marta, please," the owner nodded encouragingly to Marta, gesturing for her to step forward. Waitresses, cooks, and bartenders exchanged bewildered glances, and not a single word could be uttered. Suddenly, standing behind everyone, Gloria took a step forward. "Congratulations," she declared with a hint of irony, examining Marta as if she were seeing her for the first time. "We never doubted that you would get this high position. It's an interesting choice, especially considering that you've only been working here for a few months." Nickiner sternly looked at his protégé. "Gloria, are you unhappy with my decision?" "No, Nickiner," she replied, unfazed, and fearlessly looked her boss in the eyes. "I hope you won't regret your choice." Lorenza chimed in as well, her voice carrying in the small room. "Marta, you're amazing. Congratulations." She smiled brightly at her new boss, but there was a tinge of veiled envy in her voice. Marta smiled dutifully as she was continuously congratulated by her colleagues. She mechanically replied to them but felt no real joy. She understood that now, as she was about to replace the fired Dora, things weren't going to get any easier. She thought, "It seems like they all hate me now." That's exactly what happened. Her new position brought her new problems. Even those who had previously had good or neutral relationships with her began to treat her differently. There was undoubtedly envy. They whispered about her behind her back and discussed her, but no one said anything directly. What could they say? Marta had earned her position honestly and fairly, and they couldn't reproach her for anything. Now, her workload had increased, but her salary was even higher, and she could afford things she had never dreamed of before. She could afford them but didn't indulge herself, as she dreamed of the day she could put that money into a real business. This way, life went on. On one of her ordinary workdays, Marta was wrapping up preparations for a large banquet. A wealthy local man had rented the entire cafe for the entire day to celebrate his girlfriend's birthday in style. Marta had prepared everything as usual, perfectly executing all the client's requirements. She was sitting in her usual place next to the bar, observing the unfolding banquet. Well, rich people sure know how to party, she mused with mixed feelings. Just as she was reaching for her coffee, which she was sipping slowly in the process, one of the recently hired new waitresses approached her. "Marta, it's a disaster," blurted out the young woman named Laura. "They're asking for you." Marta frowned and said, "Why do you always have to be so dramatic? What happened now?" Laura lowered her gaze apologetically and said, "I accidentally spilled champagne on a customer. Please, forgive me, it was a genuine accident." Marta sighed heavily. "All right, calm down. I understand. Just be more careful in the future, please." Laura beamed a grateful smile. "Thank you, Marta. I'll do my best." Marta counted to 3 in her head and headed towards the disgruntled customer. It wasn't too difficult to identify the victim. He was a young and quite handsome man, wearing a completely drenched, champagne-soaked white shirt. His face was twisted into an expression of annoyance, and his chestnut, slightly curly hair emphasized his dark, gleaming eyes. Marta suddenly caught herself thinking that she found him attractive. She scolded herself for it and approached the young man. "Good evening. I'm Marta, the manager. We've already met when you booked the banquet with us. You wanted to see me." His stern look quickly softened when he saw the manager. "Ah, Marta?" He smiled broadly. "Don't you keep an eye on your waitresses? Look at the mess this young lady created." He spread his arms wide, pointing to the champagne stain. "Oh, I humbly apologize on our behalf. She's relatively new here, got a bit nervous, and, well, this was the result. As a token of our apology, please accept this small gift from us." Marta turned and signaled to the waitress behind her, who presented a bottle of the finest champagne in an ice bucket with a radiant smile. Marta also smiled and said, "We'll replace the waitress for you, of course. She'll receive a warning and the appropriate punishment. I guarantee you that." The young man scoffed. "Fine, have it your way." He reclined in his chair, propping his hands behind his head. "Someone will bring me a new shirt shortly. In the meantime, would you care to join me in the courtyard for some fresh air and a chat about how to fix this mishap?" He playfully winked at Marta. "I don't smoke, but I'll gladly join you for some fresh air for a few minutes," Marta politely replied, reminding herself mentally that a customer, especially one who has rented the entire venue for an expensive party, is always right. Once they stepped outside, the young man leisurely stretched, spreading his arms in different directions. After warming up, he inhaled deeply, taking in the fresh air, and retrieved a fine cigarette case from his trousers pocket. Marta shifted her weight from foot to foot, feeling a bit awkward standing so close to him. She initiated the conversation. "You wanted to discuss something, right? Perhaps I can offer you something else instead of champagne?" The young man lit his cigarette and blew a puff of smoke right into her face. She coughed from the pungent smell, and he burst into laughter. "Marta, look. How about this alternative? I graciously forgive the ruined shirt, and in return, will you come on a date with me?" He looked at her expectantly. Marta's cheeks flushed with embarrassment. She lowered her gaze and kicked a small pebble near her feet. "Wait, you rented our cafe to celebrate your girlfriend's birthday, didn't you?" She emphasized the phrase "your girlfriend's birthday." The young man laughed even louder and took a step closer to her. "And what's the matter with that?" He casually adjusted a strand of her hair. "By the way, I liked you right away, Marta. Of course, I remembered you." Marta noticeably became nervous. She tried to find the right words, but he beat her to it. "So, what do you say?" Lowering his deep velvety voice, he took her hand in his large and warm palm. "Will you be my girlfriend?" Turning Marta's rosy palm, he gently kissed the back of her hand, all the while gazing intently into her eyes. It was at this moment that our Marta melted away, like ice cream taken from the freezer and forgotten in the kitchen. Even when placing the order for the banquet, she had privately noted the attractive beauty of this guy. His rugged masculinity and rough and sharp yet highly appealing features on his sun-kissed face. Marta seemed to ride the wave of her feelings, but she quickly snapped herself back and mentally scolded herself for such nasty thoughts. His girlfriend is over there, waiting for him. It's her birthday today. And me? I hate myself for it. She took a step back and firmly said, "No, this can't be. You already have a girlfriend, after all." The guy raised his eyebrows in surprise. "So what? She'll understand everything perfectly, don't worry about her." He reached for Marta's waist. "Oh, I get it now. You already have a boyfriend, right? Or are you married? By the way, that's not an obstacle either." He looked intently into her eyes again and suddenly pulled her close for a demanding, lengthy kiss on the lips. Marta felt the ground disappear from beneath her feet. The last time she had such a heart-wrenching feeling was a long time ago, when she was about 16. She took a deep breath, and with a great effort, she pulled away from her interlocutor. "Antonio, you shouldn't have done that." She hesitated, not finding anything else to say. But after a brief pause, she added, almost in desperation, "It's just all wrong." Antonio chuckled, his lip corners turning downward. Smiling, he looked at Marta with a new, appraising gaze. "Listen, have you ever had a boyfriend at all?" Marta blushed. "Well, not really." She bashfully tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Why?" Antonio's eyes widened in astonishment. It seemed as if he was in complete shock. "What? Seriously? So you've never, ever? I mean..." Marta, unable to contain her smile, giggled quietly. "Yes, you understood everything, right? I've never dated anyone." "Well, you're something, Marta." The young man whistled. "All right, so be it, I forgive you. Well, I mean, for the ruined shirt." He pinched the cigarette between his index and middle fingers and skillfully flicked it somewhere into the darkness. "Au revoir. Alba is waiting for me over there." He smiled again, displaying perfectly white teeth, and disappeared behind the doors of the cafe. Left alone, Marta took a deep breath, steeling herself to return to the banquet hall. When she entered, she found that Antonio was already holding the birthday girl close to his chest. Some new, unexplored feeling pricked at Marta. Could it be jealousy? She began scolding herself in her thoughts again. "Fool. You're such a fool." Suddenly, from out of nowhere, the ever-present Lorenza appeared behind her. "Wow, what a handsome guy, huh? And he's rich too." "Too bad he's taken," the waitress dreamily remarked. Startled, Marta jumped in place. "Lorenza, seriously, why do you scare me like that?" Ignoring the question, Lorenza continued to admire Antonio. "No, but look at him, a man of my dreams." "Oh, and do you know who he is?" "No, who?" Marta inquired. "He's the son of one of our deputies. Incredibly wealthy. He's not into politics, apparently, but his wealth is off the charts." She rolled her eyes in delight. "Oh, forget him. What an idiot." Marta blurted out unexpectedly. Under Lorenza's intrigued gaze, without waiting for her to ask the obvious question, Marta told her about what had just happened in the courtyard. Lorenza whistled in frustration. "You're something. Totally nuts. You should have said yes." "No way." Marta stated firmly, turned around, and headed towards the kitchen. Lorenza followed her, expressing her endless disapproval along the way. Several days had passed since that ill-fated banquet, and Marta finally had a chance to enjoy the extra day off that her boss had offered her on the day he plucked her from the couch and made her the manager. This time, Marta decided not to be a couch potato and to do some stuff she had to deal with some time ago. Marta, hello. How was your weekend? Nickiner met her on the first working day of the week. Hello, it was good. Thank you. I went to a new pet store that opened recently. I bought a new house for my cat. Marta grinned widely, gesturing widely with her arms. It's just huge. And the price, oh my. It's more expensive than my apartment. She laughed loudly. Nickiner laughed in response. Oh, these cats. I also have a cat at home. Her name is Luna. She's so mischievous, it's awful. What's your cat's name? Max, Marta smiled. I found him a few years ago near the store. He was so sick and skinny, it hurts to remember. The desire to help a poor stray is very commendable. I'm glad my manager has such a kind heart. Actually, I never doubted that. Marta, upon hearing the compliment, blushed. She even felt a bit embarrassed. Why was her boss praising her like this? She tensed up, preparing for what the old man would say next. I wanted to discuss something with you. There are, 2 questions. First, do you remember finding those profitable suppliers? Well, for meat. I seem to have lost their contacts. Marta, breathing a sigh of relief, took out her smartphone and recited the necessary phone number. Then she asked, "And the second question?" The old man unexpectedly became flustered, and Marta saw him like this for the first time. He walked around his office and perched on the edge of the table, stroking his bushy mustache. The second question. Marta, you must have noticed that some of our employees, how can I say it, don't like you very much. Marta lowered her head as if she were guilty. Yes, I've noticed. I don't know how I can change that. I'm sorry. The old man rolled his eyes. Marta, I don't like your kindness, honestly. In some situations, you need to be tougher, bolder, and more assertive. For instance, remember when Gloria asked you to cover her shift? I remember, it was a few weeks ago, the girl answered, sensing some kind of catch. All right. But, first of all, you're not a waitress anymore, you shouldn't cover for them, you understand? Of course. But her sister got sick back then, and there was no one to cover for her. I couldn't let Gloria down, she needed to support her sister. Nickiner sadly said, Sweetheart, Gloria doesn't have a sister. And besides, there was another incident not long ago, she sent some of her friends to cover your shift. You worked in that role for just the last week before your new assignment. And, the old man mumbled, checking the date and nodding, confirming his thoughts. They came to me in person and badmouthed you, calling you a terrible worker. Fortunately, I know that you're not like that. Well, and among those people, I've simply seen Gloria many times. Do you get what I mean? Marta lifted her head, trying to hold back her tears, and softly replied. I understand. I'm overly trusting, she summarized grimly. Yes, nodded at the old man. But that's not a bad thing at all, and it's not your fault. It's just that in our team and in life in general, you need to be a bit tougher. Even more cynical, you know? People, unfortunately, are not as soft and fluffy as we'd like them to be. So, be on your guard, my dear. All right, Marta gratefully smiled at her boss. I understand, and I'll try. Thank you for the advice. Now, I'll get going, I have a lot of work to do. Of course, go ahead. The old man sat down at his desk again, taking out some papers from its drawers. Marta walked out into the hall and nearly collided with Laura. The young waitress was running towards her, saying, Marta, I've been looking for you. The breathless girl blurted out. They're asking for you over there, go quickly. Who? Marta asked with a sigh, suspecting that there were more dissatisfied customers. But she followed Laura's gaze and was surprised. There was Antonio, grinning from ear to ear and holding a lush bouquet of red roses in his hands. When he noticed her, he waved cheerfully and said, Marta, I'm delighted to see you. He declared theatrically, giving her a slight bow. Laura wasn't able to hide her excitement. She squealed softly. Marta, you look so happy. I envy you. Laura, keep it down. Marta suddenly barked at her, and the impressionable Laura was taken aback. She had never heard their always kind and compassionate manager snap like this before. Antonio burst into hearty laughter at the sight of this scene. Then he approached and handed Marta the bouquet. This is for you. Can we talk? Marta preferred to retreat to the courtyard again, away from curious eyes and ears, and nodded in agreement. Out on the street, Antonio continued. Well, he shuffled from toe to heel. I broke up with Alba. He revealed this impressive news. Now, are you ready to go on a date with me? What do you mean, broke up? Is it because of me? Marta looked at him with such hope that he couldn't help but smile. Well, because of whom else? Queen Victoria? Of course, because of you. So, are you ready to go on a date with me? A date? Marta repeated his words, contemplating her options. Antonio was genuinely surprised. What? And you don't even want to? He asked with a puzzled expression. Well, I don't even know. This is so unexpected and quick, she replied, and a recent conversation with her boss came to mind. Always be on your guard, she remembered Nicanor's words. What? The guy laughed, displaying his dazzling teeth. Quick? How did you want it then? After a year of getting to know each other? Come on. It's just a meeting, a walk, call it what you like. If you don't like it, you can just leave. At that moment, Marta, even though she had doubts about her decision, gave in. Her emotions outweighed her uncertainties. After all, this man was so handsome and so attractive. And what about reason? Reason can wait. After all, she wasn't getting any younger. She smiled flirtatiously at him and nodded. All right, why not? Antonio triumphantly grinned. Fantastic. What time do you finish working? Around 7? I'll swing by to pick you up. Ciao. He casually kissed her on the cheek, waved goodbye, and left. She didn't have time to dress up properly, so she quickly ordered the first dress she liked on a marketplace. Within an hour, a courier delivered a couple of sizes for her to choose from. Antonio arrived by 7, whistled appreciatively, and raised an eyebrow when he saw her in the outfit. Wow, you look stunning. Marta smiled, blushing from the compliment. She was very pleased with his praise. Antonio escorted her to the front passenger seat of his luxurious sports car, closed the door, and almost leaped into the driver's seat. The car roared to life like a beast and sped away in a second, nearly pushing Marta into the backrest of her seat. Well, how are you doing? A satisfied Antonio looked at her somewhat mockingly. Don't you feel nauseous? No, I'm fine, Marta reassured him, though at that moment she was more concerned about avoiding an accident at such breakneck speed. Antonio smiled in satisfaction and hit the gas even harder. Marta barely remembered the way to the restaurant. In the dense traffic, the low car maneuvered so that the lights of the taillights and oncoming car headlights merged into shimmering streaks before her eyes. At one point, she even closed her eyes to avoid seeing it all. But Antonio didn't seem to mind. And then he opened the car door for her. Get out. Come on, why are you sitting there? Marta offered him her cold, delicate hand, awkwardly exiting the car. Was she already on the other side of the city, by the bay? Yes, there it was, the expensive, famous restaurant. Wow, you're something. Her head was spinning, and her legs were shaky. If he always drove like this, maybe she wouldn't go with him again. However, Antonio took her exclamation as a compliment and literally swelled with pride. You got it. The car is a beast, and the driver is an ace. He laughed and led her up the marble stairs, holding her arm. Inside, it was simply splendid. They went up to the second-floor dining room with a breathtaking view of the bay and the city lights at night. A secluded table by the window was set with such artistry that Marta marveled at the skill of the employees working here and began to examine every detail so she could remember and try to replicate it in her cafe. Of course, she and her boss could never reach such a level. It required significant investment. Still, some things could be replicated. "Hello. Marta, are you here? What will you order?" Antonio's voice brought her back to reality. A well-trained, smiling waitress stood next to them in a beautiful uniform with the establishment's logo. "I recommend our signature dishes from the head chef. What would you like to drink? Let's start with some champagne." "You choose, Marta." Antonio sprawled in a plush chair and gave her a condescending smile. "Please bring us some Perrier Jouet and a Loin de Blanco, if it's available," Marta politely said, after studying the sparkling wine menu. "Of course, right away," the waitress nodded. "A great choice to start a romantic evening. You know your stuff." Antonio approvingly nodded. "Didn't expect that." "It's my job," Marta modestly replied. Sitting here in this opulent dining room, she still couldn't believe that such a man had taken an interest in her. In her, a simple girl who grew up in an orphanage. A girl with no education, no glamour, and no model looks. She was always prone to underestimating herself. From time to time, she discreetly pinched her earlobe when Antonio couldn't see, just to make sure that everything happening to her wasn't a beautiful, wonderful dream. It was all real. And here she was, a recent orphanage graduate, a nobody, sitting in an exquisite, expensive dress opposite the man of her dreams. And how can one believe such a thing? Well, Antonio wiped his lips with a napkin. "How's dinner? Did you like everything?" "Yes, very much," Marta smiled. "Thank you for this evening. To be honest, this is my first real date." "Really?" Antonio laughed softly, shaking his head. "I'm so impressed with you, Marta." She simply shrugged her slim shoulders mysteriously. She wasn't planning to reveal everything about herself so quickly. Antonio gestured for the waitress to bring the check. "So, what are our plans for the rest of the night? Are we heading to my place or a hotel?" Marta paled and became genuinely scared. "What? No." Antonio grinned mischievously. "What do you mean, no? What's wrong now? I've already broken up with my girlfriend, as you wanted. What more do you need?" Without looking at the bill, he handed the phone to the portable payment terminal and casually tossed a couple of crumpled bills on the table as a tip. Marta got up from the table and followed him, saying, "I don't want anything. I won't sleep with a man until we're married. It's my principle, if you will. And I won't change my mind." Marta rose from the table and headed toward the restaurant exit, but Antonio quickly caught up with her in a couple of strides and pulled her abruptly toward him. "What's gotten into you, silly?" He kissed her on the neck and ran his hand down her smooth, exposed back. "Don't be ridiculous, let's go. I won't do anything bad to you." Marta was turned upside down, and he was so close that she could feel his scent and his warm breath. But she found the strength to push the audacious man's hands away. "No, Antonio, I'm not going anywhere. I'm sorry that I wasted your time, but..." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Please understand, I just can't. Besides, I have a cat waiting for me at home." She cast one last pleading look at the young man, then literally dashed downstairs, seeking refuge in the women's restroom. There, she caught her breath, freshened up, and ordered a taxi. An intrigued Antonio remained standing near the staircase. "That's how it is, right? She has a cat." He chuckled, and then unexpectedly burst into loud laughter. Marta returned home, her eyes filled with bitter tears. She was hurt that Antonio had treated her like an easy fling. She kicked off her uncomfortable heels and found herself in bed, burying her face in a pillow. Her insides were in turmoil, choking with resentment, leaving no room to collect her thoughts. She grabbed her hair and asked, "What's wrong with me?" She truly couldn't understand why Antonio had acted this way. In the days that followed, her intrigued friends repeatedly asked Marta about her date. But she waved away their persistent questions. She had no desire to discuss Antonio. Moreover, he hadn't appeared again and hadn't even called to check if she had made it home safely. It's not love, Marta concluded, summarizing her failed date, and she resolved not to even think about that rich scoundrel. In the past few days, Marta has been spending more time with her boss. He paid a lot of attention to training his new manager. Additionally, they drank coffee together, tasted new dishes, and discussed whether to include them on the menu or not. They talked about their pets, devised advertising strategies, and handled other work-related matters. Today, as Marta was enthusiastically detailing her latest concept to Nicanor, Lorenzo persistently knocked on the office door and, without waiting for a response, cheekily pushed her pretty face through the half-open door. Marta, the waitress, greeted her, attempting to maintain business etiquette. There, something incredible happened. You won't believe it. What? What happened? Marta, the manager, rose from her seat. What's going on again? Nicanor asked with concern. Your suitor has come back. She chuckled joyfully. And he says, well, just come and see for yourself. Unable to contain her excitement, she completely entered the chief's office and tugged Marta along. We're all in shock. Don't you even think about it. Don't be foolish, okay? It's better to agree, the waitress said to the bewildered Marta. Lorenza, please stop, I'm begging you, she finally implored. Oh, you'll see for yourself. Lorenza excitedly giggled and pushed her into the room. When Marta saw what was happening in the room, she involuntarily let out a soft cry. In the middle of the space, completely unfazed by the many diners, stood Antonio in a formal light suit. Next to him was a massive basket filled with an incredible variety of flowers. A small orchestra was arranged along one of the walls. Spotting Marta, Antonio waved his hand, and the musicians began to play a charming melody. He then approached her and went down on one knee. In his outstretched hand was a velvet red box. Marta, my dear, I've thought about what you said. You are absolutely right. Someone like you should not be taken lightly. That's why I've made a decision. In one swift motion, he opened the box, revealing a ring with a substantial gem. Will you marry me? He asked, coaxing her. Marta froze, like an ancient statue or an enchanted princess from a fairy tale, upon whom a wicked sorceress had cast a terrible spell. Almost the entire staff, as well as some of the customers, had already gathered around. Curious kitchen staff and cooks peeked out from the kitchen. They all craved a spectacle. People stood still, much like Marta herself, waiting for her response. I don't know. I need some time right now, please wait, she suddenly blurted out and rushed back up the stairs. Nicanor, Marta cried out in despair as she burst into his familiar office. Nicanor, only you can help me right now. What on earth has happened, Lord? The owner exclaimed, alarmed, as he emerged from behind his desk. What's going on? He held the trembling girl by the shoulders and peered into her face. What's it? He brought a ring. Marta squeezed out with a trembling voice. Who did? That rich scoundrel? Yes, he proposed to me. Just now. He's still there, waiting. Please, I'm begging you, tell me what to do. I have no one else. And Marta burst into tears, burying her face in the old man's shoulder. Well, my child, the touched boss stroked her head with his rough hand and comforted her. You did the right thing by coming here for advice. I've seen a lot in my life, and moreover, people like this Antonio, so I see through them. He lifted her chin with his hand. You shouldn't agree, he said firmly, furrowing his bushy brows. Otherwise, you might deeply regret it. The old man's tone changed beyond recognition. He spoke with such tenderness in his voice, with an audible sadness. It was as if he was giving advice to his own child. Now, go and take your destiny into your hands, he said as a parting note. Think carefully about your decision, don't rush into it. Marta's head was spinning, and her vision darkened for a moment. She felt as if there were two different entities sitting on her shoulders, each whispering their advice. One insisted, "Of course, agree, dear. Such a chance comes once in a lifetime. If you miss it, you'll never meet a man like him again." The other spoke sensibly. "It's not worth diving headfirst. If he truly loves you, he'll understand and wait until you're ready." And now she was standing before him again, visibly nervous. "Have you powdered your nose?" He laughed, trying to conceal his disappointment after her hasty departure. "So, what will you say, my dear? I love you and want you to be my wife. What more can I do to make you agree?" Marta said quietly, "I'm thinking." She glanced around the room, full of people waiting in anticipation, then looked into Antonio's eyes. In them, she saw what she had hoped to see: boundless love, anticipation, and hope. "Of course, I agree." It felt like someone right next to her said it, and before Marta could fully grasp the situation, the crowd erupted in cheers. The little orchestra played a triumphant melody. The room burst into applause. Customers and staff smiled, offering their congratulations to the newly engaged couple. And now, on her finger, she wore a huge ring. Antonio embraced her and kissed her on the lips in front of everyone, and the only discord in her memory was the angry, unfriendly look from Gloria. Apart from that first kiss, which took place in the courtyard, this public kiss, following the shocking engagement, was only the third in her life. The very first one occurred when she was a teenager in her childhood home. Michaelo, her teenage sweetheart, was her peer and classmate. When they realized they had feelings for each other, they were both 16 years old. The teenagers hesitated for a long time, but one day their burning curiosity and sincere emotions overcame their shyness, and they shared their first kiss. But their relationship couldn't develop further. Michaelo left the orphanage a few weeks after that first kiss. Unlike Marta, he had parents, but they had lost their parental rights at some point. During the time when lonely and vulnerable Marta believed she had found her soulmate in this world, Michaelo was taken from the orphanage by some distant relatives who obtained legal guardianship. Marta never heard from her beloved again. So, Antonio wasn't her first love in the classic sense of the term. However, he managed to strike a chord in her heart somehow. Analyzing the kiss with him, as much as she could when alone with her thoughts, she couldn't compare it to the kiss from her distant youth, but it felt more confident and mature. He was a real man. A man she believed she could trust. At least that's how it seemed to her. Then, in the cafe after that unforgettable proposal scene with the ring, Antonio suddenly pulled out some papers. "Look," he proudly said. "I knew you'd say yes, so I took the liberty of preparing the documents for our marriage. All you need to do is sign, and the rest is up to me." He lowered his voice. "Well, you understand, right? I used my connections. We won't have to wait. We can get married tomorrow if you want. So, what kind of wedding would you like?" Marta's hands trembled, and she looked closely at her fiancé. "So quickly? Why? We hardly know each other. Why are you in such a hurry?" Antonio frowned in displeasure. "In a hurry? Why do you keep saying it? I love you and want you to be my wife. Isn't that a good thing?" He lowered his head and gazed at his perfectly polished shoes. "Well, if you think it's too fast, you can decline. I thought you loved me too, but you—" "No!" Marta exclaimed sharply. She immediately regretted her excessive emotion and looked around. Nicanor was standing in the corner of the room, observing her with a thoughtful and sad expression. She turned back to her beloved. I love you too. I just didn't expect everything to happen so quickly." The young man smiled again. "How so, my love?" "I'm doing it all for you." He handed the girl a piece of paper and pulled out a gilded Parker pen. "Come on, sign it." Marta slightly frowned and read the document. Antonio hadn't deceived her, it was indeed an application for the civil registry. She carefully examined all that was written, then asked in surprise, "How did you get all my information?" Antonio winked playfully at the girl. "The power of love." Marta smiled weakly. She had already reached out her hand to sign, but something held her back. She began to contemplate. Her boss's recent words immediately came to mind. She twirled the pen in her hands and, nonetheless, put her signature on the paper. It's fate. It's true love, she persuaded herself, pushing away the tiring thoughts. Antonio seemed to be overjoyed. "I love you," he shouted, drawing the attention of those around them once more. "Well, I have to go," he said, carefully folding the signed paper into a folder. "I'll take care of all the paperwork right away. And you know what? I suggest we celebrate our wedding right here. What do you say?" He spread his arms as if he wanted to embrace the whole small cafe. Marta smiled tenderly. "Let's do it. Then you take care of preparing for the celebration, and I'll handle the payment and everything else." He hugged the girl one last time and disappeared through the cafe's door. Nicanor immediately approached Marta. It was evident he was concerned. "Marta, what did you just sign?" he asked, his voice trembling with worry. "It's an application for the civil registry. We'll be getting married very soon," Marta answered, trying to inject some pride into her voice. Nicanor furrowed his silver eyebrows even more. Judging by the expression on his face, it might seem like something terrible has just happened. He led Marta into his office and said sternly, "Marta, what if it's not for the civil registry? What if he deceives you? Robs you? What if he uses your signature to take out a loan?" Marta laughed. "Nicanor, come on. What loan? You know Antonio is from one of the wealthiest families in our town. And what could he possibly steal from me? Just think about it." The old man squinted his eyes. "You can rob someone without taking a single cent from them. I hope you never have to face that," he sighed to indicate that their conversation was over. Marta thanked him politely and left, shrugging her shoulders. As for him, he began to contemplate. In truth, he was well acquainted with Antonio's family. These people had never, in their lives, needed money. On the contrary, they were so wealthy that they could afford practically everything. Yet there was something fishy about it. But what? Soon, Marta got lost in the pre-wedding hustle and bustle, forgetting everything else. She meticulously selected everything related to the wedding. She still couldn't fully believe how lucky she had been with Antonio. She carefully chose the flowers, spent hours studying the menu, and even agonized for several long, tedious hours over the choice of napkin colors. She wanted everything to go beautifully, memorably, and perfectly, even though the guest list was quite modest. Most of the guests were Antonio's friends since Marta didn't have many people to invite. Her boss, Nicanor, was the girl's most important guest. He was clearly not thrilled about the wedding, but he couldn't refuse the invitation, of course. Marta greatly respected and even loved this grumbling old man. After all, he had given her everything she had now. Ultimately, it was thanks to him that Marta met her future husband. A few days before the wedding, another circumstance came to light. The groom's parents wouldn't be able to attend the wedding because they were abroad, dealing with urgent matters. Marta was naturally disappointed upon receiving the news, but she didn't show it. Moreover, Antonio promised her that they would have a family gathering after their honeymoon. "Trust me, sweetheart. You won't miss much if you don't see my parents at the civil registry." On the actual wedding day, Marta received another surprise. Antonio had arranged for the registrar, a dignified lady, to come to them, and the entire wedding took place within the cafe's walls. It turned out that this service was called outdoor registration. Marta quickly looked it up online, and it indeed existed. As for Marta herself, she had prepared everything perfectly. The hall was adorned with white and lilac flowers. Lavender was chosen as the primary color of the celebration, decorating everything in soft pastel shades. Antonio's friends turned out to be predictably diverse. Each one of them was incredibly glamorous, wealthy, and influential. They scrutinized the cafe closely, but apparently, out of politeness, none of them said a word. Nevertheless, their expressions clearly revealed hostility and arrogance. Marta tried not to pay attention to such trifles. Nothing could spoil her joy and happiness on that day, not even the disapproving looks from her groom's friends. The waitstaff serving the banquet were divided into two camps. Some were happy for Marta, cheering her on and complimenting her on her gorgeous white dress and excellent hairstyle, while others could not hide their antipathy and blatant envy. Lorenza and Laura acted as Marta's bridesmaids, wearing lilac dresses. And when the newlyweds exchanged rings, even the most discontented couldn't hide their smiles. Nicanor himself couldn't hold back a single tear. He saw how happy Marta was, and he observed the tenderness and love her newlywed husband showed her. Maybe I was wrong, he thought to himself, the cafe owner. Love can find a person in the most unexpected places. And isn't Marta the most beautiful girl in the world? Right after the newlyweds' dance, a tall and statuesque woman in her 30s approached them. She was wearing a splendid black silk dress, and her shining hair beautifully cascaded down her well-arched back. "Antonio, can I have you for a moment?" she said. "Why?" Antonio asked with a smirk, not letting go of his young wife. "Speak as if I have nothing to hide from my wife," he chuckled, looking into Marta's eyes. Marta felt a bit embarrassed, saying, "Well, if it's something important?" "No," Antonio replied curtly. The woman who had approached him pursed her lips, gazed directly into his eyes with a long and thoughtful look, and then said, "All right, I'll say it. Antonio, please, think carefully about your married life." She carefully chose her words, and Marta understood that she couldn't say it directly. "You know, real people are not toys you can use and discard when you're done with them," she cryptically concluded, shook her head, and walked away. Marta became wary, but Antonio simply laughed cheerfully. "Oh, she's just jealous. She used to chase me all through school. But now it's time for you and me to head to the hotel." He looked at her in a way that turned the modest Marta into a blushing maiden. "What about the guests?" she asked. "Guests? They can have fun without us, and something special is waiting for us," he whispered in her ear, making Marta giggle shyly and casting her eyes downward. Bright sunlight shone into the room, and Marta almost jumped up, her first thought being about work. Did I oversleep? But then she remembered yesterday, the wedding, the previous night. She smiled without opening her eyes, sweetly stretched, and found out there was no one next to her. Concerned, Marta sat up on the bed and looked around. Antonio was nowhere to be seen. She looked around the room and softly called out, "Darling." But there was no response. Marta carefully got up, wrapped herself in a sheet, and went in search of her husband. After all, their hotel room was simply vast. However, he wasn't in the living room or the bathroom either. An unpleasant feeling, a hunch, pricked at the young wife's heart. But Marta quickly brushed aside these foolish suspicions, thinking that Antonio might have been temporarily occupied with work. And indeed, he was. She noticed a small note on the coffee table, and it had a message written for her, "Dear, good morning. I had to leave urgently for some important matters. Let's meet a little later, around lunchtime, at your cafe. Love and kisses to all of your, well, you know." She read the note, and her thoughts turned to the memories, causing her to blush again. When she entered the cafe, her presence caused a stir. Everyone congratulated her again, the girls giggled and bombarded her with questions. Only Gloria asked coldly why she wasn't already in the Maldives. Marta responded with a disdainful smile, promising herself that she would fire that haughty woman at the first opportunity. Then she checked on her current tasks, drank her coffee, and found herself with nothing to do. Today, Lorenza was covering for her at the cafe, a position she had been grooming Lorenza for a long time. After all, the life of a married woman involved unexpected twists. Marta smiled again at her thoughts. Yes, she was definitely ready for any twists, and this joyous feeling infused her with newfound hope. As lunchtime approached, Marta began to worry. Antonio hadn't texted anything yet. She was hesitant to call or message him herself, afraid that it might distract him from important matters. Several hours passed, and as the sun began to set, Marta started to panic. Antonio still hadn't appeared. Could something have happened to him? She became increasingly nervous, trying to call her husband, but he didn't answer the incoming calls. Fear for her husband made her hands shake, and she started to imagine various horrors. Then the cafe's front door burst open, and Antonio entered, surrounded by his friends. Marta was relieved. "Oh my God, where were you? Are you okay?" She rushed towards him, but stopped abruptly on her way. Standing to Antonio's right was that very woman he had been seeing before, Marta. It was her birthday that the rich group was celebrating in the cafe, the day Marta had first met Antonio. She froze in place, trying to understand what all this meant. The cheerful group did not seem to get embarrassed, and they quickly took a seat at a free table. All of them, including Antonio, appeared to be in high spirits. Antonio's ex approached Marta with a smirk. "Well, young lady, don't you want to offer a table to your husband's guests?" She asked mockingly, and then burst into laughter, throwing her head back. Antonio laughed along with her, while Marta was in shock. All eyes turned towards her once more, and now a burning sense of shame turned her face crimson. She gathered her courage and approached her husband. "Darling, what does all of this mean?" She tried to hold his hand, but he pulled away and grinned. "It means, Marta, you're an idiot." He shouted these cruel words as loudly as possible. The surrounding people fell silent, eavesdropping on the conversation between the newlyweds. "It means I bet on you," he shouted again. "Antonio, stop it. What are you saying?" Marta responded through tears. "Let's go somewhere else to talk." "No, let everyone know what a naive fool you are," Antonio retorted, downing his glass of whiskey in one gulp before stepping into the center of the hall. "Listen, everyone," he yelled, grinning. "I bet a substantial sum that I could bed this sheltered virgin. Have you ever seen a nun like her? I had to lie and say that I broke up with my girlfriend, but she still wouldn't have me. So I had to resort to trickery. I faked documents and everything to make this foolish orphan think I genuinely married her. Ha ha. Of course, this wedding was a farce, a fake. I'll never marry someone like you. It was just a bet. Now, serve us like a good restaurant attendant. Because you're nothing more than that now. Come on, let's go," he insisted, approaching her closely. "Or have you forgotten what you did last night?" he said lecherously, grinning and looking right into her eyes. Tears welled up in her eyes, and her entire body trembled. She opened her mouth to respond when a sudden, loud noise interrupted the scene, and all the cafe's visitors began to panic, scattering in all directions, leaving their belongings unattended. In the center of the hall, Nicanor suddenly appeared, holding a double-barreled hunting rifle. Antonio and his companions quickly exited the room, leaving Antonio behind. The other patrons huddled in corners, leaving only Antonio, Marta, and the furious Nicanor in the center of the hall. After reloading his rifle following the first shot into the air, Nicanor addressed Antonio sternly, aiming the gun directly at him. "Apologize immediately to the young lady," he ordered. He pointed the rifle straight at Antonio. "Apologize. And yes, you will marry her," the old man said firmly. Antonio burst into loud laughter, throwing his head back, but fear was still visible in his eyes, even though he tried his best to hide it. Marta slowly approached the old man, whispering in his ear, "You don't have to do this, he's not worth it." The boss didn't respond to her, impatiently shaking her hand off his arm and keeping the gun raised. "Old man, what's wrong with you? Have you gone completely insane? Get out of here, you lunatic." He spat at Nicanor's feet. "I'm not marrying her. Get lost. That's it, I'm out of this madhouse." He made a move to leave, but the stern voice stopped him again. Apologize to her. Go to hell. Antonio shouted back in fear. Shoot, you coward. My parents will deal with you. Before Antonio could finish, another shot rang out. Nicanor aimed at the floor next to the scoundrel's feet but accidentally grazed one of his limbs. Collapsing, the young man cried out in pain. Marta screamed in horror, and the cafe's employees emerged from their hiding places. Nicanor slowly approached the young man lying on the floor. You will apologize and marry her, he said firmly. He glanced at his employees and casually ordered, call an ambulance for this scoundrel. The old man spat on Antonio and retreated into his office, leaving everyone in utter confusion. Nicanor. Marta rushed into the office, falling to her knees before the old man. Thank you for standing up for me, but what now? What will happen? They'll arrest you. The old man lifted the girl, seating her on a nearby chair. There, dear, don't cry, he comforted her, patting her on the head. Contrary to his advice, Marta burst into tears again. She felt humiliated and trampled under the polished boot of the rich scoundrel. Furthermore, she was guilty for setting up the only person who had shown her sympathy, accepted her, and given her a ticket to a better life. Finally, Marta raised her tear-filled, swollen eyes to the old man. Forgive me, she whispered softly. Forgive me. You need to disappear immediately. You know he has very influential parents. You must leave now, she firmly declared. Calm down, you're not to blame for anything, the old man calmly replied. Nothing will happen to me, I assure you. I know his parents well. They are honorable people. Trust me, if they find out about what happened, they'll be on your side. But if I do get arrested, well, that's my fate. I have no regrets about what I've done, the old man concluded. Marta slowly sipped the water he had poured for her from a boiler in his office and said firmly, It seems I know what we need to do. 3 weeks had passed since the horrifying incident, and there was still no news of Antonio. Reflecting on everything that had happened, Marta caught herself entertaining a sinister and dangerous thought. She found herself wishing for Antonio's death. Realizing this, she was genuinely frightened by her own thoughts. Wishing for someone's death. How did I ever come to this? She thought in horror, unable to shake these demonic ideas from her mind. Time went by, but it didn't heal, as the common saying suggests. However, during this short period, the once naive and kind Marta had become an entirely different person. What had transpired had made her grow up and become wiser. Sometimes she felt as if she, like a phoenix, burned to ashes and rose again. One day, she finally decided to take action. She informed Nicanor that she would be busy in the morning and went to the police station. Good day, the duty officer greeted her indifferently. He was sitting behind a small desk, engrossed in some papers. Please have a seat. I'm Officer Michaelo Ray, part of Internal Affairs. How can we assist you? He looked up, and Marta gasped in astonishment. Michaelo? Michaelo, is it really you? The young sergeant seemed to forget how to breathe. With widened eyes, he stared at his visitor. Marta! I can't believe my eyes. You've become so beautiful. Marta gave a faint smile, feeling somewhat embarrassed and averting her gaze. Before her, there was Michaelo, her first and possibly only true love. They had last seen each other many years ago, on the day he, still a teenager, left the walls of the orphanage. Since that day, she has often, very often, remembered him. So, now you're an investigator, right? Such a young one. The young man grinned broadly. Well, almost. I'm still an assistant, but I'm learning quickly. The higher-ups praise me, saying I'll achieve a lot. And you? How have you been? He asked. I'm sorry, here I am, blabbering on. Something's happened to you, hasn't it? Tell me, please. By the end of her sorrowful tale, he was shouting in anger, his fury barely concealed. "I'll kill that scumbag." Marta shook her head. No, calm down, please. He's not worth it." After consulting with senior colleagues, they prepared a statement accusing Antonio of fraud and rape. My kilo cautiously touched her hand. "I understand that this is a difficult time for you, but maybe we could go somewhere together." Marta, however, pulled her hand away, and tears welled up in her eyes once more. "No, I can't for now. I'm sorry." Antonio limped out of the taxi. A couple of hours ago, Marta had called him and asked for an urgent meeting without specifying the exact reasons. Initially, he was taken aback by her audacity, but after some thought, he decided to meet her. He quickly called his buddies, inviting them to go together. "Let's have some fun with this beggar," he teased them. But most of his wealthy friends chose not to get involved in the situation again. In the end, only 2 people agreed to accompany Antonio, his girlfriend Alba and a friend named Olivio. Alba helped him out of the car, supporting his arm, as his leg was still in a cast. Olivio squinted in the bright sunlight, already standing near the cafe's entrance. Antonio looked at Alba and thought, "Why do you forgive me for everything?" As the cafe door swung open, Antonio prepared to spew some insults at his fake wife, but froze in his tracks sitting in the company of Marta and the strange old man who had almost shot him were his very own parents. "Oh, there you are," his mother said, giving him a stern look. "Sit down." She pointed to the spot beside her as if scolding a misbehaving schoolboy. Antonio slowly took the offered seat. He looked around. Alba and Olivio had already disappeared. He swallowed heavily, realizing that his parents would not approve of his behavior. Marta spoke first. "Take a look," she casually handed Antonio some papers. He quickly glanced over the documents and became stupefied. It was a summons to the police, accompanied by a copy of Marta's statement. He looked at his parents. "I'm not guilty. It's all lies," he yelled, attempting to defend himself. "Shut up," his father barked, finally breaking his silence. "Listen to what she has to say." Marta spoke firmly. "If you don't do what I demand, I won't withdraw my statement. You will be arrested for fraud and rape." She paused for a moment. "I hope you're aware of how prisons treat rapists. Your parents, as you already understand, won't be able to help you." Marta glanced at the elderly couple, and they nodded in unison. She continued, "But you have one more option. I can withdraw my statement, but only if you marry me. After all, I'm expecting a child from you." She looked at everyone present and concluded, "The choice is yours." Antonio remained silent. The news that he would soon become a father did not fill him with enthusiasm. Finally, he raised a heavy gaze. "Oh, really? You're all in cahoots, I see. In that case, I'll sue you," he said, extending his bandaged leg forward. "Do you think they give a lighter sentence for attempted murder with the use of firearms?" He cast a menacing look at the silent Nicanor. But Nicanor replied with nothing more than a contemptuous stare. Marta stood up from the table and nonchalantly told Antonio, "Think about it." She left the room without waiting for his response, knowing full well that Antonio had no other options. A couple of days ago, thanks to Nicanor's assistance, she managed to contact Antonio's parents and tell them about their son's behavior. The spouses were shocked by what they heard. Learning about the girl's pregnancy, they persuaded her to have a real wedding. Marta agreed. She didn't want her child to grow up without a father. Antonio's parents promised to deal with their own son. Hearing about Nicanor shooting their son didn't even particularly anger them. After all, Antonio couldn't be justified. For years past, Marta carried and gave birth to a healthy, strong boy. Antonio, before their son was born, finally gave in and married Marta for real. There was no celebration, of course. The young couple simply signed the papers quietly, avoiding eye contact. Life went on. Marta, along with her son, moved into a new, larger, and more comfortable apartment, which Antonio's parents had purchased for them. Antonio, as you can imagine, had no intention of living there. Marta had no desire to live under the same roof as him. Initially, Antonio was constantly in a state of anger. He had no wish to see the girl who had outsmarted him or her child. But Marta, now married and financially secure thanks to the support of Antonio's parents, decided to continue her beloved job. After all the events she had been through, the young woman had grown even stronger. Finally, she put in place all those who had made fun of her in the past. Now no one dared to cross her path. Returning from her maternity leave after 4 months, Marta left Gloria without hesitation. She had had enough of her former colleagues' antics. She and her boss had genuinely become like family. Moreover, Marta named her son after her excellent boss, Nicanor. As the child grew a bit older, he began to call the old man his grandpa, which delighted Nicanor immensely. Time went by, but Marta couldn't shake the thought of her Michaelo. She thought about their long-ago encounter every day and regretted refusing the young man's date invitation. And she kept wondering, did I make a mistake by marrying Antonio? I can never be happy with him. These thoughts didn't make her happy, but she was afraid to change anything. After all, he was the father of her child, and his parents had treated her with great decency. Were these family ties more important for her than anything else? Antonio gradually adjusted to his new life. His infamous freedom was still intact, except for the marriage certificate in his passport. But after a few years of a carefree life, he suddenly realized he desperately wanted to see his son. Marta didn't deny him this wish, as she remembered that he was the biological father of the child, and the child was not at fault. To everyone's surprise, the wayward father and the little son quickly found common ground. "Mom, my daddy is so nice," Nicanor exclaimed in delight. "He can grunt just like a real pig." Marta didn't know whether to laugh or cry at her son's revelation. As he grew older, Antonio genuinely reevaluated many things. One sunny evening, he gathered the courage to do something important. "Marta, hello. Can we meet? What's this about? Can't we discuss it over the phone?" Marta asked, folding Nicanor's belongings neatly. "No, could I come over to your place?" "All right," she shrugged. "Come, just not too late. Nicanor is in bed by 9. When she opened the door an hour after that conversation, she was stunned. Antonio's face was nowhere to be seen behind the enormous bouquet. Without saying a word, he entered, knelt down, and handed her a small red box. "What's this for, Antonio?" The woman looked at her supposed husband with a puzzled expression. "Are you up to your old tricks again?" "Marta, no, what are you thinking? It's been so many years. I've changed. Don't you see? I've thought a lot, and finally, I realized I truly love you. All I want is to live together with you and our son." He looked into her eyes, hoping to see tears of joy. But Marta's face remained calm. She felt nothing for him anymore except pity. "You're hopelessly late with this, my dear," she finally smiled with her lips only. "It seems we're finally even now." "Marta." He tried to grab her hand, but she quickly pulled it away. "No, Antonio. You can see Nicanor whenever you want. But as for me, I don't love you anymore. I think I never truly did. I'm filing for divorce tomorrow." With a leisurely gait, the young, beautiful, and confident woman walked along the promenade. When she reached the bench where she and her friends used to sit many years ago, she smiled, approached the ice cream stand, bought the largest cone for herself, and, sighing contentedly, sat down to gaze at the bay. Now she knew for sure that there was no place in her heart for Antonio. Never. Her big, loving heart belonged only to 3 living beings in this vast world: her little son, her chosen father, Nicanor, and her old, chubby cat. But maybe there's room for someone else in it. Who knows? In the distance, gradually emerging from the mist, a male figure appeared. He was getting closer, taking on familiar contours and finally materializing completely. "Marta, hello. I'm so glad to see you. How are you?" he asked, sitting down beside her. "Hello, my kilo. I invited you here to tell you that I got divorced from my husband yesterday," Marta smiled. "And if your heart is still unoccupied, maybe we could go somewhere." "Absolutely, let's go," he said, breaking into a joyful smile. A year and a half later, the same promenade welcomed these two again, but now in the company of a cute pink stroller and a completely gray but still very lively and self-assured man. The whole party walked leisurely along the bay, frequently glancing at the lovely transport and cooing at its passengers. When they reached the ice cream stand, they encountered a tall, handsome man who had brought a 7-year-old boy with him. He handed the boy over to them, and the happy family gradually moved away. After some time, the boy turned around and waved to the man, who stood there, near the ice cream stand, and watched them for a long, long time.